First, are there any members of the public wishing to speak on topics not on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll go to the first item.
Good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Simon Kiefer. I'm in Community Development, and I bring you today a request from the Housing Authority for an increase of an existing agency loan by $2 million. This is for an affordable housing project that's planned for 512 to 518 Bath Street. The agency approved a $1.6 million development loan last June for this project, and the requested $2 million increase is designed specifically to improve the likelihood of securing tax credits for this project. Bradley Studios is a 54-unit rental housing project that would be built for a combined tenancy of low-income downtown workers and special needs homeless persons. It will be built on a site that the Housing Authority acquired in 2008 with assistance from the Redevelopment Agency in the form of a $4.8 million acquisition loan. The site is located in the redevelopment project area. It's 512 to 518 Bath Street. It's right there where Bath and Haley and Mission Creek all come together. It's a large 1-acre parcel that's mostly vacant. And at the rear is a 10-unit apartment building that would be demolished as it encroaches into the existing 25-foot Mission Creek setback. The new project would then feature an increased setback for the creek and then considerable natural habitat restoration. And all this would be done in conjunction with the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control and Restoration Project. The design for Bradley Studios project was approved by Planning Commission last July. Now, tax credits is critical to the financing of this project, and competition for these funds is very strong. Tax credits are so valuable because they provide large direct cash infusions to these projects. If awarded, Bradley Studios would then have 80% of their hard construction costs covered, or about $5 million, without adding any debt to the project. Simply put, there is no other comparable financing mechanism for developing affordable housing today. Competition for these funds has grown only stronger lately. Bradley Studios submitted an application last round and it was rejected. It was not rated as highly as competing applications in one particular category, which is the local subsidy category. Other applications showed a greater percentage of their project financing coming from their local jurisdiction, and so they subsequently scored higher. By increasing the agency loan by $2 million, then we would boost the score for Bradley Studios in this category, and we would reduce the amount of tax credits that's requested. So both factors together would greatly improve the chances that Bradley Studios would receive a tax credit award. The filing deadline for this application then would be July 6. Now, the proposed $2 million increase would result in a subsidy that's somewhat greater than what we typically provide. Currently, the subsidy for Bradley Studios is at $6.4 million, which is about $119,000 per unit. By going up to $8.4 million, this would result in a per unit subsidy of $156,000. Now, if we look at the 7 most recent projects that we've built over the last 6 years, the subsidies range from $93,000 to $165,000 per unit. The average among the 7 would be $119,000. So yes, it's a greater subsidy than what we typically provide, but this appears to be the primary means by which we could secure the additional financing that's needed for this project. We do have sufficient funds to accommodate this request. We have $4 million that's uncommitted in housing set-aside funds. And as per state redevelopment law, these funds can only be spent on building low and moderate income affordable housing. The risk would be limited. The redevelopment agency funds would only be provided in the event that there is an award of tax credits, and this would apply to both the $2 million increase and the original $1.6 million loan. Lastly, staff considers Bradley Studios to be an important project for the community, and we support the requested increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kiefer. Questions from the subcommittee? Mrs. Self?
Thank you, Chair Francisco. Were there any modifications granted for this project?
By Planning Commission, you mean?
Yes.
Commission? Let me think. There were a number of concessions that were granted, and I think probably Rod Pearson from the Housing Authority could best describe all of those.
Mr. Pearson.
Yes, Chair Francisco, members of the Finance Committee. There was the typical bonus density that we would receive for an affordable housing project of this nature in terms of its deep subsidy, and the other was on a parking modification. But it proved out to the transportation engineer that based on our experience on similar low-cost affordable rental housing, that the parking was adequate. And beyond that, I don't believe there were any modifications.
Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you. What's the total cost of the project?
Our projected cost for construction is going to be wait 1 second, just had that down here. $8.8 million, and then there's the land cost on top of that of 4.6 or 4.8. I'm sorry.
So roughly 13.
About $13 million
Okay.
for 56 units.
Thank you.
Mr. Kiefer, just a question about the public subsidy component in the competition. Do you have an idea of what the comparable subsidy was in winning applicants? Are we comparing ourselves to them? Is that how you came up with the $2 million? That's what I'm getting at.
Yes, I think Rod Pearson would probably have the best and most up-to-date information on that. They're just still in the process of going through the applications from Sacramento. We haven't gotten the exact. The results haven't been released, but I think Rod.
They were released on Friday. Yes. The results for the tax credit application process were released on Friday, at least the preliminary awards. There were 2 granted in our region. The statewide average on local subsidy is now at $137,000, so the $155,000 would put us slightly over. All of these applications that are getting awarded today are based on getting the 148 actual points that you can get, and then you go into tiebreaker scores. We thought we were really good at a 65.8% tiebreaker score. When we ended up under this new submittal, we'll be closer to 95. And looking at the projects that got a tiebreaker scores, the ones in our region this last round got 78, and then there was one awarded at 63. Which is slightly lower than our tiebreaker score, but that's all the money they had left in the pot was to fund a smaller project than ours, so they reached down below us and picked that one. We're thinking with this allocation of local funding and a 98 tiebreaker score, it would be tough for any competition to beat us out that would go back in. There were 2 awarded in our region out of 9 that were submitted, so competition has been fierce. This program also attracts private developers, and I think with the development community basically shut down in most parts of the country, particularly in California, more private developers are looking to this funding source as well, just to stay busy and to be producing something. So that's why the competition, in my mind, has increased so dramatically. And we've also had redevelopment agencies, I think, worrying about what's going to happen with redevelopment, that they've been willing to pump more money into getting these projects that have come so far into an approval status. So they've been willing to provide more money to them, much like we're making this request to you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Certainly.
Thank you. I'm not familiar with all the details of it, but with the Artisan Court, my understanding was because of the money had to be spent, and so a lot of the construction project got upgraded, and so what I'm wondering, is there a way, instead of spending that money upgrading a project, to pay back the housing authority if we end up in that underbid situation?
Yeah. What happened at Artisan Court, and I think it's reflective of the construction industry, is that we are getting very competitive pricing on new construction projects. Contractors are hungry. They're sharpening their pencils and reducing costs wherever they can. The problem, and again, this was a perfect storm, because this Artisan was the first project we had excess money to spend for upgrades. And under the tax credit program, when you submit your application, you are submitting your investor's bid on your tax credits, and their whole pricing structure is based on having a certain amount of eligible basis for depreciation, because the investors are looking at this from a tax advantage.
Right.
So if you don't spend all of the money upon which you promise them to deliver depreciation, their pricing structure changes. So it's
Okay.
kind of a no-win for us. It's really driven by the private sector that wants that full eligible basis. So they encourage us because they price their investment based on having so much eligible basis to depreciate. So if we don't spend that money, their pricing structure changes and it works against us. Hopefully with Artisan, and if we're lucky to have this happen on this one, we're looking at upgrades that really improve the longevity of the development, reduce our maintenance cost over time, and hopefully deliver a more attractive product to the community, which I think works for the neighborhood and the residents. So,
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Any public comment on this topic?
I do want to point out we do have Housing Authority Commissioner Don Olson and Catherine Woodford. If you have any questions, for the
Okay.
Commissioner.
Thank you. Discussion? Motion?
I'd move, this is a recommendation to council to approve, is that what we're doing? Mm-hmm. And I'd move that the Finance Committee recommend approval of this commitment of funds.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you on
Thank
behalf
you.
of the Housing Authority.
Okay. Next item. Mr. Casey, what a pleasure to see you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. Paul Casey giving the presentation today on the request from the Ensemble Theater for a grant agreement recommendation from the Finance Committee to the Redevelopment Agency Board for $1 million grant agreement towards their project at Victoria Hall. Back in 2006, the Redevelopment Agency Board put aside $1.5 million for a joint project with the Trust for Historic Preservation and the Ensemble Theater for some site improvements and improvements to the Al Hakama Theater on the Trust property. That proposal did not go forward, and the Ensemble Theater Board, who I think are here today, can speak to that, but they decided to pursue a different option rather than remodeling their existing facility. And the Trust for Historic Preservation wanted to go forward with their half of the project. And so in 2009, about 2 years ago, we came back to the board and we bifurcated that proposal and let the $500,000 go to the Trust for Historic Preservation, and then still reserved $1 million to support the Ensemble Theater once they secured an appropriate site. They've secured the site now at Victoria Hall, and so they're coming to the agency board to request a grant agreement to solidify the $1 million grant towards the improvement to the Ensemble Theater project at Victoria Hall. Total construction cost is about $5 million, which they are proposing they would fully privately fundraise for those improvements. And what they are proposing is that the $1 million be used at the end of construction to furnish items like seating, draperies, stage rigging equipment, audio-visual, stage lighting fixtures, and dimming and lighting controls. And so kind of the end of the process type facility improvements. The benefit to the city is by entering into a grant agreement, Ensemble Theater has the confidence that the money will be there. The benefit to the city and the Redevelopment Agency Board is that our money is the last money in. And so oftentimes when we get involved in construction and fundraising projects, it's a difficult dance to know when should you put your public money in versus when do we know there's a viable project. We're secure here in knowing that there's a viable project because we come in at the end, and the grant agreement has a provision that once the building official has determined that the majority of construction is complete, then we would release our $1 million, and so the security provision there is good. So we're here to get the recommendation of the Finance Committee to the Redevelopment Agency Board about whether to enter into a grant agreement. We have provisions drafted in the staff report for grant agreement provisions to include, and I'll just highlight a couple of them. There's a disagreement with the attorneys involved about whether this $1 million will trigger prevailing wage requirements on their construction project or not, and so we're writing the agreement such that they would be required to pay prevailing wage unless they can get a written determination from the State Department of Industrial Relations that it is not required to do so. We want to make sure we're following the law as it relates to prevailing wage, and so that's the condition we have there. No disbursements are made until the renovation is deemed substantially complete by the building official. And then kind of our general security interest into the property to kind of back up our $1 million grant. And that the Victoria Theater serve as a community arts facility by regularly offering the theater to nonprofit organizations at favorable rates so that when the Ensemble Theater is not having to use the theater, it can be accessible by other entities in the community. So with that, Happy to answer any questions. I will state on the process, the project is moving through the development review process now. It does require all its development review approvals. You are not approving any development review approvals today. They need to stand alone through our development process for changes, physical changes that they want to make to the theater. This is merely entering into a grant agreement to preserve the $1 million if and when they finish construction and are ready to access the money.
Very good. Questions from committee members? Nope. Okay. Any members of the public wishing to comment on this?
Good afternoon. As pointed out, the $1 million in redevelopment money was originally designed to enhance the publicly owned, or since the trust in the park, or the El Presidio de Santa Barbara State Historic Park is definitely a public entity. As I recall, as you said, the fund was to go to the upgrading of the historic Alabama Theater. And of course, if the funds went there, any prospective tenant of the 120-seat theater would benefit from the upgrade, as will with the park. Why should the city give away $1 million for the upgrading of the interior of a privately owned building? How can this use of city's fund be construed as redevelopment? And my big problem, and maybe, is that the plans have not been seen or approved yet by the various city commissions, such as the Planning Commission and the Historic Landmarks Commission. And maybe things have changed, but some preliminary speculative plans I've seen would require the theater supply space to rise as tall as the Libero Theater, and what would that do to the site from a historical and aesthetic standpoint? I said, if the city, and this pointed out, needs to redistribute or distributed redevelopment funds, shouldn't this $1 million go back to the Presidio campus where it was originally designated? Thank you.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, Kellum DeForest.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Derek Weston. I'm on the board of Ensemble Theater Company. Jonathan Fox, our executive artistic director, is also here. So we appreciate staff's recommendation. We appreciate the motion. We hope you will approve it. I would like to comment just very briefly on some of the points that Mr. DeForest has raised. First, it's not quite right to say that we are privately owned. We are a public benefit corporation. So all of us who serve on the board are volunteers, completely unpaid. The assets of all nonprofit public benefit corporations are really held in public trust, provided they're used for public benefit. So this does not redound to the individual benefit of any one of the directors. It is to the benefit of the public benefit corporation itself. It is not correct that the original grant was for the Alacama building. The original grant was an even larger grant in the amount of $2.5 million, and that was an allocation which the redevelopment agency set aside for Ensemble Theater Company to explore the possibility of building a brand new building. At the time, we were looking at the middle of the Granada block. When that proved infeasible, the RDA continued the allocation at a reduced amount of $1.5 million for our benefit for improving a permanent home. So when it proved impossible to make the kind of improvements that would have been necessary at the Alacama, we began exploring the alternatives for a permanent home and are moving forward with the Victoria. So we believe that the allocation was always for the benefit of Ensemble Theatre Company, a public benefit corporation, not for an asset, but to help us with a permanent home. And then last of all, in this case, I think that there's a very strong case for redevelopment agency authority because the building is very run down. Don't want to insult the owner by saying it's blighted, but I think it meets the definition of blight, and we will make it a wonderful facility. In reality, the Alacama is owned by the state of California, and the long-term plans of the trust, it's our understanding, are to use that for a visitor center. I think that there will be far more public benefit and public use by Santa Barbara citizens with our proposed use than if we had been able to stay at the Alacama. So the last comment I have is with respect to the physical improvements. You are making no recommendations whatsoever. If our proposed changes are not approved, then obviously you will not be committed. We are only making 2 proposed changes to the exterior. We've been working very closely with staff. We'll be meeting with the Historic Landmarks Committee soon, and we are optimistic that when people see the plans, they will think they're very attractive. They will not think that they are high like the Lobero fly loft. But that's a question for another day. So I appreciate Mr. DeForest's comment. He's a good Santa Barbara citizen. I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have, and we appreciate your help.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weston.
I have one question.
Certainly. Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a chunk of money that was spent on the Alacama Theater, however, was there not?
Yes, and that was that was because that building, which we are still using and will be using for at least another year, had very serious electrical and fire suppression deficiencies. So we thought the trust was anxious to make that. They had worked very cooperatively with us for many years, and we thought we really shouldn't wait 3 years without those improvements being made. And at the time, it still was not certain that we would have the Victoria. So we supported the trust in using a portion of those funds to fix up the building and are only asking for the balance. Does that answer your question?
I think it does.
Yeah.
And then also, the trust supports the ensemble's proposal. Is that not the case?
Yes. You will recall that last Wednesday, I believe it was, Jerry Jackman, who's the executive director of the trust, spoke, I must say, very eloquently in favor of this proposal. So this has, I think it was a year and a half ago that we and the trust came together and said, we, Ensemble, would support $500,000 being used to fix up the Alacama building now, which we'll be using for a number of years, and the trust supported our either spending the balance on the building or, if we were able to acquire the Victoria, transferring it. And that's where we are today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weston.
I would like to add that we think we are making very, very excellent progress on our fundraising, are confident. And the last series of improvements are actually just for the fixturing. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Casey, did you have something to say?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could just talk about the philosophical approach of use of redevelopment dollars as well. Going back over 35 years, the arts component of revitalizing downtown has been a real pillar of the redevelopment agency. It's been in the master plans for the agency, and you have spent a number of dollars over the years supporting arts organizations and capital improvements to arts facilities throughout town. 2 most notable being the Granada Theater, which is a privately nonprofit-owned facility, but a renovation of an existing theater in the heart of State Street. And also money has been contributed to the Lobero Theater, which is also a historic building in town. And so we think this is consistent with the agency's contribution to arts facilities over the years. And the driving force for that is keeping what we always called bodies on State Street. We want bodies downtown for the economic vitality of downtown, and having a vibrant arts community in the heart of downtown brings people into the central business district and benefits all the business owners and surrounding activity that goes along with it.
Okay, thank you. Please. And please state your name.
Here to speak on this issue. I came in support of
Please
the
state your name for the
Housing
record.
Commission, but I didn't
Could you
realize-
please state your name?
Oh, sorry, Catherine Woodford.
Thank you.
And I heard this was on the agenda, and I am a long-time subscriber to the Ensemble Theatre. I think Jonathan Fox has done an outstanding job of improving that theatre over the last few years. We are getting Broadway quality shows in there all the time, and they're an excellent contribution to this city. The theatre itself, the current theatre, is in very bad condition. It's very cold in there. We're complaining all the time. We're freezing in there when you open the door to go outside. The seats are very uncomfortable, and there is a limited capacity. There's one bathroom for the ladies. There's a line a mile long, and there's one for the men's. We do need the ensemble to be given a really good home in this town. It's an excellent organization. It adds a lot to the arts and vitality of this community, and I think the new location at the Victoria Theatre will really enhance the downtown businesses and operations and help the arts community a lot. So I really hope you will support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from the public? Seeing no one come forward, I'll close public comment. It's back to the committee. Questions, comments?
Comments, anyone?
Certainly. Mr. White.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, I think that Mr. DeForest's questions was a good line of questioning to raise. And for me, the fact that a portion of the funds was used to improve the safety of the existing facility is important to me. I think it's just it's meets the goals of the redevelopment agency, and then secondly, this citizen-based effort to take the Vic Theater up to back to maybe not. I don't think it's even back because it's going to be better than it ever was. I'm really enthusiastic about this project, and I think that also I appreciate staff's effort in the work that we've been doing, that's been done the last few weeks on allocating the RDA money and coming up with the highest priority, which is the police headquarters, and then still being able to fund some of these critical projects. So I'm an enthusiastic supporter of this, and it meets several of the key city goals, the number one being the police headquarters, and this still can occur within that context. So I'm a strong supporter.
Thank you. Mrs. Self, anything to say on this? No. Okay. I would just like to say that I agree with Mr. Casey's historical perspective on this. It has been a goal of the city for decades to create a thriving performing arts district downtown, and I think that the proposed renovation of the Victoria Street Theater will be a key part of that strategy. And I also appreciate Mr. DeForest's comments, but again, I think historically the city had made a commitment quite a while back to the Ensemble Theater to make this project go forward. It will provide a unique performance space that, in addition to being a home for the Ensemble Theater, should also allow a lot of other community events to occur there. And we don't have a space that really meets the specification that the new Vic will. So times are tough, but I think we need to keep a long-term perspective. This has been a goal of the city for a long time. I think this is a great opportunity, given that we have a private organization that is providing the vast majority of the funds and will take care of all the operating expenses. I think this is a great opportunity to leverage what remains of our RDA funding. So I would certainly entertain a motion to recommend this to the full council.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would move that the Finance Committee recommend to Council that the city grant the Ensemble Theater's request for $1 million redevelopment agency grant of capital funds.
Is there a second? Thank you. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.